So, welcome everyone to Obelisk Support's latest Move the Needle webinar. This series is designed to support you in your freelance legal role by anticipating some of the challenges you might face and to help you overcome them. This webinar is being recorded and will join the other Move the Needle webinars on the Obelisk Support YouTube channel. I'm Lucinda Ackland, Obelisk Support's Learning and Development Partner. And today we're going to be talking about mastering the art of interviews. Now, many of you will obviously have had many interviews in the past in your career to date. And the point of this webinar is really to give you some best practice tips to give you more confidence for preparing and interviewing for roles when viewed through the lens of the freelance legal consulting sector. So I'm thrilled to introduce you to the team who you'll see. There's Jane Leader, who you've come across before in part of the onboarding process, our recruitment manager. Evi Keskoska, the client relationship director, who's going to add her perspective of what the clients are looking for in interviews. And also Daniela Garcia, who is the consultant experience manager. And again, many of you may already know her, and she's your point of contact throughout the interview process, which will be coming on. So, housekeeping wise, please do feel free to put any questions in the Q&A area or comments as we go along, and I'll keep an eye on those. So, tools for confidence. The webinar describes interviewing as an art, and I think that comes through from having confidence, not only an inner confidence in your skills and abilities, but also being able to demonstrate that confidence to others in an interview situation. So before I start, I really need to emphasize the good news, because once you're invited to an interview, your chances of success are really high. Obelisk have selected you for your legal and commercial experience. And obviously the clients have chosen you because they're very interested in what you have to offer. I should also add, clients using Obelisk are obviously wanting to get their legal need matched quite quickly. It may be they've got additional business as usual work, or perhaps a particular event such as a new project or a big contract has come along. So they tend to be much more focused on appointing someone in role quickly. And so that's another point to mention, that the process can move along quicker than a full-time role. So these are 4 elements, tools that I've summarized to help you. We're going to be covering these particular 4 topics. Firstly, the practicalities. We'll be covering the Obelisk process for being invited to interview and the process. And again, highlighting where we can the differences for freelance interviews. Secondly, how to prepare using focused research on the clients so that you have the best knowledge that you can to help you. Thirdly, how to prepare for questions. Some people find competency questions quite difficult to know how to prepare for, or perhaps they may be a bit anxious about talking about career gaps. So we've got some points to help you with that. And finally, how best to bring it all together, demonstrate your alignment of your skills and experience. And really, it's your opportunity to show the clients how you have all the right attributes for the role. So I'm going to ask you, Evi, as a client relationship director, could you just give us a brief outline of the process of arranging interviews?
So first of all, we will send you a job description. You will have all information about the client, about the rates, about the hours, and with your consent, we will submit your CV to the client. After that, one of the team members from the client team at Obelisk will get in touch with you to get the interview arranged. One thing to bear in mind, the contact is usually through jobs@obelisk.com, obelisksupport.com. So make sure you add this email address to your safe senders, and just in case you're not receiving the notifications, check your spam folder. So once we've been in touch, we have arranged the interview. It will be usually a Zoom interview, although it might be a different communicator. Last year, we even had one face-to-face interview. We will then give you tips how to prepare for the interview. Sometimes we have noticed that the clients are asking for something on top of that just before your interview. So they might ask you for a short paragraph of what is your motivation for the role, why are you applying for this company, or some legal writing assignment just before interviewing, as we are operating in a very competitive market. And once the interview is scheduled, our lovely Daniela will send you an interview prep document with all the information around the client, but I will hand over to her to tell you more about it.
Thanks, Evie, very much. So Daniela, could you set out the next stage of the process and some of the information that you'll be putting in your interview preparation document?
Sure. So the interview preparation document will essentially have all the information that we have already provided in the job brief. What we try to include is maybe just additional information that could help the consultant prepare. So we would have sent the job brief earlier so that the consultant can see if it's a good fit. That information will include all of the job details, so the description, the dial-in details, confirmation of the date and time, the required commitment, and so on. So the additional information we will include we might have sourced from the client. So we'll always try and give the consultant some insights into the company culture, the team dynamic, so that they can prepare as much as possible. We will also include LinkedIn details of the interviewers, so that they know the kind of nature or format of the interview as well. And consultants are less likely to have 2 interviews, but it is something that has happened in the past, and we'll try and find out as soon as possible if this is something the client wants to do. So we'll provide the consultant as much notice as possible, and we're at hand to help them prepare for the meeting. So if they still have queries, if they're not sure about anything in the interview, things that might come up, I'm more than happy to run through, do a run through session with them and address any queries that they might have. So if there's any area that you need advice, please get in touch with me. I'm more than happy to help you prepare so that you can put your best foot forward.
Great, thanks, Daniela and Evie. So we'll be coming on to practicalities of different interview formats a bit later on, but I want to spend some time on the second aspect, research and preparation. Essentially, it's a skill that can be learnt, and particularly if you follow a framework, it really helps you use your time efficiently and can calm any nerves that you might have in terms of the preparation, particularly if you haven't had an interview for a while or you're new to the freelancing world. So looking at researching the client, essentially we want you to be putting yourself into their shoes. What they do as an organisation, what is their commercial reality, such as any particular sector challenges, whether they have an international or a UK presence. What kind of customers do they have? Are they business or consumer focused? And what kind of regulatory framework they operate in? The second of those points, the organisational values, those are typically found on the website. We will highlight if they have a particular ethos that we think you need to know about and from our dealings with them. So that's a very important thing to think of these days. Thirdly, their legal needs. Do they have particular risk areas or pinch points? What are the legal implications of the type of work that they're doing? And then on the other side of the research is looking at your interviewer. What is their role in the organisation? What do you think their perspective might be from their role? And it's also quite useful sometimes to think about how long they've been there. They may have been in previous roles, and can give you a good insight into the organisational team. So these are all points of information that help you build up a picture of the organisation. Evie, with your client focus, can I ask you about tips that you might have for researching clients, where they might find information?
Yes, I would really suggest to do online research of the client, not only using their website, but also checking their news, blogs, perhaps also the financial or sector press, as well as social media presence. I would also focus on the organizational values. So they would usually state them on their website or on their branding. Also check their corporate values. What is their mission statement? And depending on the size of the legal team, the legal needs may vary. So it could be that there will be a legal department, or it could be that you will be talking to the CEO or the CFO, who will just need lawyers on an ad hoc basis.
And in terms of the interview format, how many people are you seeing generally, Evie, in terms of being the interviewers?
So usually we see one person being the interviewer,
Yeah.
and that's for the general commercial roles.
Yeah.
I would say that will be the person that you will be working with day to day. They want to see if there's chemistry between you and the interviewer. But in the more heavily regulated sectors like finance or banking, public sector, you may see more interviewers at the same time. So a panel interview of perhaps HR team and also some senior legal staff. For private practice, for law firms, we usually see the lawyer partner and also some HR staff.
Okay, thank you. Now, Jane, with your experience in interviewing, can you give us any tips on researching the interviewers themselves? What points are there? Is it good to look for?
Well, I guess ideally, if you're already looking at the website for the company, you'll hopefully come across them as people on the website as well. So see what information you can glean from there, their LinkedIn profile, or just Google them generally. I think it's great to try and get a feel for who they are and a bit about their career history. It's quite nice to see if you've got any common contacts in your network, and that can be quite a good way of finding sort of common ground or good for an icebreaker, I guess, as well at the start of the interview. It's probably worth noting, if you are Googling them, there's a good chance they will have Googled you as well. So have a look at your LinkedIn profile and update that. Obviously, it's better if that matches your CV. I often find a lot of LinkedIn profiles are out of date, and obviously they will already have a copy of your CV. So it'd be good to have a look at that, and maybe just check over your social media presence as well, just to check that is okay. And as Daniela said, we'll give you as much information as we can about the person or people you are going to be interviewed by. And even if it's regardless of the length of the role, this is still a really important decision for them. So it's good to put as much effort into a 3-month role as a 12-month role. You just never know where things might lead and go on to next. So they would be my thoughts on that.
Thank you. That's a good point to make as well. Short roles can often lead to different roles and more roles. And as you say, you never know how things will develop. Daniela, I think you've got a point to make about a resource that we have on our help centre about LinkedIn.
Yeah, and that comes back to what Jane said, having a good consideration of what we currently have on LinkedIn. If we need to update it, we actually have a really useful video of a webinar we did with a social media specialist, and it focuses on LinkedIn and how to make the most out of it, with a particular focus on how to showcase your profile. So we encourage you to update your LinkedIn with the assignments you are embarking on with Obelisk. However, unless we have the client's consent on naming the company name, please stick to naming Obelisk as the company you are providing support to, and then you can mention on the description the kind of work you are providing the client. You can find the link to the video in the help center, but I'm sure we'll also send that out so you can view it.
Great, that's really helpful advice, thanks. And thinking about, to summarise some of the client and sector research resources that might be useful for you. These are readily accessible online resources, and many have free email subscriptions. Legal Press, these are the obvious ones which will give you market information about various developments. Turning to sector publications now, particularly point out Lexology. That is a really useful thing. That's where law firms have put out client notes, and you can select sectors and various industries. If you're going for an interview at a law firm, you may find the person you're interviewing or their department has a client note, and maybe a point of worth mentioning in the interview. Certainly sectors, have a look at particular chambers or barrister blogs. On the business press, The Economist and the Financial Times, you can get free articles up to 5 a month. And of course, market news, Obelisk Support wants to help you as much as possible. So you have your weekly newsletter, you have Attic articles, we have a social media, online presence, which highlights various articles that we think are particularly important. Now then, coming on to questions. Some people are taken aback if they're asked, why do you do consultancy work? These days, clients are really aware of this different career path. Obelisk clients might be keen to know why you as an individual have arrived at this point, and use the question as a way of getting to know more about you. Also, in the case of ad hoc and remote roles, clients are often interested to know how you manage your work. So a common starting point might be the interviewer is asking you to explain your circumstances. So I think it's really useful to have prepared a few lines to summarise briefly your background. So Jane, some consultants might be concerned about career gaps or redundancy. What reassurance can you give them?
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly in the last couple of years with the pandemic, a lot more people now have career gaps in their CV. So they're certainly common. And I was just thinking, I read a lot of CVs, and it is helpful if it's accounted for in your CV, just with the dates and that you have a career gap. Otherwise, I'm frantically trying to work out the dates and trying to work, if I'm reading them incorrectly, or trying to work out what it is. So I think in an interview, obviously they'll have your CV and they'll be able to see that maybe you've had some time out, which is fine. And I think the key is really just to be open and honest about it. Practice what you're going to say so you're prepared and less likely to waffle unnecessarily. I think it's good to give a reason, but you don't need to go into a huge amount of detail. You can offer to say more about it, but it's likely that they won't, you won't need to say any more. I think if you don't say something, personally for me, it tends to raise more questions than it answers. So I think, these days there are so many options why that break could have been there, whether it's, it could have been redundancy and not being able to find another job. That's happened a lot in the last few years. People are now taking sabbaticals, parental leave or maternity leave are very common. And people are going travel, or there are health reasons as well. So there could be any sorts of reasons. So it's just, I guess, being able to clearly describe your circumstances during that time, if they ask you, or if you want to offer that information. Obviously, if you have had a break, and for some people it could be 6 months or 6 years. I think if it's a longer break, then being able to, again, being prepared and being able to demonstrate how you've kept up to date, or certainly how you are going to be keeping up to date as you're starting to look for a job. So yeah, I don't think it's anything to hide away from, but something that needs to be acknowledged in the interview for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Evie, Daniela, anything to add?
I would just add that our clients actually really like our ethos, and they are aware that we might have people on our books who had a career gap, and they are very willing to help. So with that in mind, I think it can give you some reassurance as well, knowing that this is why the clients are actually coming to us.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Obviously, if anything occurs to you that you're a bit concerned about or you want to rehearse through, Danielle is always here to help you. So I'm going to come on to competency questions. What would you do, or how would you respond if, or based on your experience, tell me about an example when you overcame a particular situation. Obviously, they're not trying to trip you up. They just want to know how you deal with difficult situations. We obviously know changes happen all the time in the workplace, time pressures, difficult interactions, or perhaps a goalpost change. So it's a good way of showing that you can cope in a variety of circumstances. And a way to prepare for it is to make a list of your successes or challenges you might have faced, and structure using the STAR acronym. So think of the situation, what was the task, what action did you take, and what was the result. It's really important to have something to say, so it is worth spending some time thinking about this. The other point I would mention is structuring your answer. We all know that being a bit nervous can make us waffle a little. There's a technique called the Minto pyramid principle. So you structure your answer by having a good lead point. You then support it with 3 extra bits of information underneath that first bit, and if necessary, expand on that. Now, Evie, what do you think clients are really looking for?
Perhaps look to your experience and think about any praise and success stories that you have received for your assignments. Think about difficult situations or difficult transactions in which you were able to find a solution. Also think about the communication and dealing with challenging stakeholders. It could be internally or externally. Think about tricky deadlines that you were able to meet. And maybe some particularly difficult drafting tasks. I would also try to look for alignment to the company values in preparing for this type of interviews.
Yes, I think it's quite difficult sometimes if you can't think of a particular suitable example. And I think it's quite useful to be able to think, well, I haven't had that exact experience, but something similar. So essentially, as the quote says in the slide, it's always better to say something and try to use one of your examples, even if you have to adapt it, because you're providing them with a positive example of achieving or solving something, and you can demonstrate how you do this in the interview context. You can prepare further by doing this with a supportive friend or a family member, or indeed, Daniela, I'm offering you as a source of support. It may be you've had previous interviews, so think about the questions you might have had. Another way of preparing for competency type questions is to have the formula that is based on your personality strengths. So if you think about what would people say were your top 3 great qualities, and you can use those. You might have been described as somebody who's a good communicator, so you can say, if I had to deal with a difficult person, I can do this. That type of thing. So, as I say, if you think about what would somebody describe you, or indeed ask your family or a friend, what are your top 3 greatest qualities, and then think how those great qualities can be used in a challenging situation. Jane, in your experience, do you have some ideas about the sort of strengths we should be looking to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, with the briefing note that Daniela sends out, we will have briefed you. Hopefully we'll tailor. You want to tailor your answers to the what the job requires. So hopefully we'll be able to give you as much information on that. But typically, they're looking for someone with good communication skills. So, if you haven't been able to get some of these answers out in previous questions, then focusing on being reliable. Resilience, that there's bound to be questions relating to dealing with difficult situations or difficult people, and being adaptable. Obviously, you're coming into these roles, being sort of helicoptered in, and in some cases having to get up to speed pretty quickly. So being able to demonstrate your ability to do that, and that's pretty key as a freelancer. I mean, being able to work independently, particularly if you're working, and you probably will be working from home, that seems to be continuing for now. But well, it's being independent, but also, you know, somehow also being part of a team as well on a remote basis. Other things, sort of lateral thinking. What else can I say? And just anything. And I was just thinking, maybe if you were less experienced and you're a more junior lawyer or perhaps a paralegal, and you don't necessarily have a lot of work experience to draw from, you know, think about other things you've been involved with, whether it's volunteering or, gosh, I don't know, internships, or you might have done some vacation schemes, or just anything that you've done in your life where you can apply that particular question to. And I think I found something on LinkedIn yesterday. They have a tool that you can, they give lots of examples of questions, and you can record yourself, record your answer, which, or write your answer down. So it's quite a good way of being able to practice and hearing your answer back in your own voice. And I think you touched on this, Lucinda, about how easy it is to waffle. Sometimes what I do if someone asks me a question as an interviewer, I just write down one word, and it just reminds me what question I'm actually answering. You know, there is a tendency to go down, you start answering the question and then get lost in it, and, you know, trying to claw your way back. So sometimes it's just easier just to have a quick reference point. And I think that's one of the great advantages of doing these online interviews. You can have your notes in front of you. So, and particularly if you're doing a lot of interviews all together, it's sometimes easy to forget where you are in that particular interview and what you've already said. So yeah, just being able to make some notes is also quite useful.
Evie, Daniela, have you got anything you might want to add?
Just going back to the examples that, you know, as a consultant, you might be providing for the competency-based questions. I think if you've done an assignment successfully through Obelisk, really point that out. I think a client will see very well, they'll really like the idea that you've worked with us, that you know our work style, that you've completed the assignment, and that we've now placed you onto another potential match. So I think highlight that, highlight the key takeaways, and you know, you're more than likely to hear, you know, if it's leading to a second interview, those are unlikely. Usually we only conduct one interviews, but, you know, it does happen. So pointing out any successes that you through Obelisk assignments are always great.
Yeah, thank you.
I would also add,
Evie,
if you can think about a situation that didn't go so well, because the client might ask you for that, how were you overcoming challenges? Focus really on the learnings that you have taken from this assignment and how you have applied this learning going forward, and how are you going to apply this learning in the future. And I have noticed quite often with our clients questions about technology. So some things that might be obvious for you, how to use Microsoft Office or G Suite, are not so obvious for the clients. I think it's always useful to highlight those in your interviews of clients. What technology have you used? What systems you know? What tools? As the clients are quite often looking for that nowadays, especially in the remote working module.
great, thank you. So moving on to the fourth element of the preparation, where you basically bringing things together, demonstrating the alignment of your skills for the role, both on the technical side and attitudinally. It's really getting yourself into the mindset of the client and looking at your skills matched to the particular role. So it's an opportunity to really explain how your experience would be a real asset to them. We've touched on job descriptions that we're given by the client. So they may not be as full as a permanent role. So you need to really hone in on the key requirements and what we mean by technical and attitudinal is aspects about, will you be working solely or with the team? Are there going to be particular time pressures for targets? What's the commercial arena for the advice? So look at your skills, your commercial experience, and have examples again of when you've done similar types of work. the last point, the transferable skills, again, leads back to this element of if you don't have the exact experience that the role is highlighting, don't worry about that because you've been selected by Obelisk and then the client, but have a think and give some examples, have them to hand about transferable skills. You'll also have social skills, life experience, and wisdom that you can highlight as really positive assets. And we would very much want you to put your best foot forward in interviews, be cheerful and positive and energetic, and showing the willingness to get the job done. That's really compelling for clients. It sounds quite a basic thing, but I think it really is something that's important. Just again, picking up on remote roles, your ability to work to particular patterns and the hours that they require. We should have been able to give you those details. So telling people how you do work, ad hoc work, or during, flexibly, it often is important for clients to know that. And it may be relevant if you've got previous managerial, team or project management experience. We're going to now look at the logistics and practical aspects of the interviews themselves. And obviously the pandemic upheaval meant that working practices are still in flux. People are starting to go back into the office. But as I gather, Evie, most interviews and roles are being done from home, so remotely. Can you tell us a bit more about the type of interviews that consultants are being offered at the moment?
Yes, so I would say the majority of the interviews are remote interviews. We only had one face-to-face interview last year. But I would say as things start to open up, perhaps be prepared for some on-site interviews. Of course, Daniela will provide you with all the logistics, how to get to the client, but also be prepared to see some on-site roles. And maybe as a pointer to prepare for such interviews, like even though the client has seen your CV, be prepared to talk them through it. And always check that you and the client have the same version of the CV, that it's all up to date.
Thank you. So I've put up here the practicalities for in-person interviews. Daniel, I wonder if you could talk us through some of the thoughts that you've got about preparing for in-person interviews.
So I would say, bear in mind COVID precautions. So we would usually say to offer a firm handshake and give good eye contact, but maybe just gauge from the client as to how they're reacting to things, and then take it from there. We would also say check the route in advance and plan for alternatives should there be any roadworks, transport disruptions. We would advise that you leave at least 30 minutes extra to your journey just in case, and also allows you a downtime to just sit at a cafe, find a nice quiet space to review your questions and pace yourself for the interview. And make sure you have our contact number, especially my mobile number. So if you have any problems, please give me a call. We can get in touch with the client. And, when it comes to actually going to the office and to see the client, maybe just arrive 5 to 10 minutes early, observe the surroundings and the people. It's also a good time to look at, the culture within the business, how they're interacting. Maybe it's something that you can bring up in the interview. And just bear in mind that you're making an impression from the start. So make sure that you're nice and polite to all the staff you meet. Some clients ask receptionists and other team members what they thought of you. And so it's really important that you establish a rapport with everyone you meet and the client. Do you have, maybe something you can bring up in your interview? If you have a common contact, perhaps a previous employer, is there an interest in common? Have you seen an article that relates to the business? Anything interesting that you can bring up that can help build that rapport. And make sure you come across, like you said before, friendly, but you do have the right tone. You don't want to be overly friendly or informal. So just gauge from how the client is interacting with you.
Yeah, thank you. So the practicalities for remote interviews. Daniela, again, what are some of your key takeaways?
I think, check you understand the joining instructions. At times you might be sent links, and if you notice that maybe it's once to join a team call and the other one's Zoom, or you're not unclear, just make sure you raise that with us. Make sure the links are working. Who is calling who? Usually it's the consultant dialing into a link that we would have set up. So you would join that link and communicate with the client that way. So check that, if you need to download Zoom or any Teams applications, some computers don't allow you to directly log in through the browser. So just double check that it's all working. You have my contact number, so if you need any help, I'm at hand to help you with all of that. And make sure you have a quiet indoor space so you don't run the risks of having any interruptions. Prep with sufficient time. Warn people in the household to bear in mind that you're going to go into an interview. Check your workspace, is it appropriate for the interview? Have your CV at hand, the interview prep document in case you need to reference to that, and maybe pen and paper just to jot down any triggering thoughts, any questions you might want to bring up during the interview, anything that you want to explore. If the client is requesting something from you, just have that at hand so you can make a note. And have a glass of water, and dress professionally, and just check your background. Is the client going to be concentrating on what you have in the background? Is there something moving? Just something to bear in mind. Make sure you don't have any notifications that might be distracting, so have those switched off, as well as maybe your phone. Is there a lighting in front of you that's not suitable? So just bear that in mind before your call. And if you're dialing in, maybe start 1 minute before the time, and make sure you're ready. Set an alarm maybe for your interview, although I will aim to either give you a call or send you an email earlier that day, just as a reminder of your interview. And during your interview, just speak clearly and with enthusiasm. I guess it's quite difficult speaking to someone via video camera. So just, we need to compensate with body language, having a good posture, standing up if you feel that's more comfortable, show your hands. Apparently it just makes you more personable. Like Lucinda said, avoid the Zoom loom. So just try and not lean in nor lean back, not shuffle too much. But if there's a problem with technology or you're struggling to hear the interviewer, just politely interrupt when you have a chance. And we suggest you try dialing in again. And if the issue persists, if you notice that this is lingering on for more than 1 minute, then you've got my number at hand. Just give me a quick ring and I can notify the client and try and help you establish connection again.
Yeah, thank you, Daniela. It's useful to know you're always there to help. Jane, anything to add?
Not really. I think Daniela's covered a lot of those. I mean, it is what she was saying about having notes in front of you, that they can be such a great prompt. There's nothing worse than finishing an interview and realizing you didn't say something, or there were points that you should have raised that would have been really useful. So I think that can be really convenient to have that. But yeah, following the interviewer's lead, for example, particularly if they start with small talk, then keep that going. As Daniela said, turning off anything that is distracting. Notifications is one of those. The doorbell's been ringing during this webinar. I don't know who it is, but they're very persistent, but it can be enough to sort of, take your focus away. I actually, for Zoom, and I don't know if you can do it on Teams or Google, but I minimize my screen and I move. So I take myself off the screen and I just move the other person just below the camera. So it's much less distracting for me, and I can just see the person and sort of look into the camera. I think it's much better for eye contact. I think that's I quite like doing that. And yeah, and just keep listening. I know it can be hard on a screen, and just aim to be succinct as much as you can. You can always add things later if you remember them. But yeah, I think that's everything.
Great, thank you. So we've got to the point where they may ask you that, do you have any questions for us point? And I think it is useful to think about the context, because it may have been much more of a dialogue kind of interview where you're asking questions during. So have the context of that in mind, but certainly prepare at least 3 to 4 thoughtful questions. This shows that you've done your research and that you're confident enough to ask if something isn't that clear. It also helps you stand out from other candidates, and you can gain any further clarification if you haven't done so already. So I've got 4 areas here that I think are quite useful to structure some of these questions. The first is operations and culture. So is there something about the business or the sector, that lends itself to their communication styles? Who are the decision makers? Where would you get help or assistance for a particular project, particularly if it's a remote piece of work? And the availability where you'd need to be pointed to get the legal or company resources. The second area talks about what is the composition of the team like, and how does the reporting lines work in practice? Other questions that might be, are there any challenges that impede deliverables that might be relevant to a particular piece of work that you're doing? Timeframes that you need to be aware of. Evie mentioned earlier the question about your competencies for technology, so it's always useful to know what their technology that they use day to day is. Coming on to the expectations of the role, if you need to get any clarification on any aspect that about the organisation or the department, are there lots of new contracts? Is it the end of quarter? What are they really looking to get out of the role, if that's an appropriate way of framing the question? And the last idea is it may be ask the interviewer about their background in the role, how long they've been there, why do they enjoy working there? So those are some ideas for you to have as standard questions, but obviously you need to tailor them for the context. So Evie, Jane, Daniela, anything to add in that you can think of that might be useful?
I was just going to say, a good interview will put you at ease, hopefully. They certainly go into that interview wanting to enjoy it just as much as you hopefully want the role. So, show enthusiasm and make the most of it, because as I said before, you never know where it might lead in the future. So first impressions do count. And also don't be afraid of silence. It can be quite a good tactic. Some interviewers will just stay silent, even though you feel like you've said everything. And if you have, then that's fine. But there is then that temptation to keep talking. And I think that's when possibly things come out that you don't necessarily need to say or you haven't prepared for. So, and I think it was already hard enough in person. I think it's probably even harder online to be comfortable if no one's saying anything for 10 seconds.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And obviously, if you are not sure that you've answered the question, you can certainly say, have I given you enough information? But yes, I think that's a really helpful way to frame it.
I would also like to just probably add, don't mention anything that might jeopardize the interview. So for example, something that might be tricky and the client might not look kindly to is maybe raising rates, raising any conversations around potential issues you might have. I don't know, I'm thinking maybe you need to work flexible hours and the client's not aware of that. Mention all those to us during the interview prep stage. We will try and highlight those to the client the best way possible. But you don't want to bring any of those up during the interview. You really want to just set yourself forward for the best experience possible. Leave those complicated questions for us to address, and we'll make sure we'll mention them to the client before the interview and also after the interview. So give us as much notice as possible.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Daniela. So yes, so just to echo those, question of being positive and thanking the interviewers for their time and the opportunity. The process is that the client will contact Obelisk with feedback and for next steps. We would like it if you could contact us, specifically Daniela, whilst the interview is fresh in your mind. And it's a good idea to be able to think of your impressions and indeed write down any of the questions that you were asked. That is useful for you to sort of develop a bank of questions going forwards if necessary. And we certainly have faith in you. So we want you to remember that, even if sometimes coming out of an interview, you're not sure, please remain cheerful and have faith in yourself. On that point, Daniela is the Consultant Experience Manager here to help you. And so she can give you further interview coaching on a one-to-one basis. You need to set that up with her. We've got articles on the Obelisk profile. We send the weekly community newsletter, and the Attic has articles on flexible working with industry insights and tech tips to help you. We've also got a number of these Move the Needle webinars to give you different insights into aspects of working flexibly. You can find them on the YouTube. And in terms of keeping up to date with your legal knowledge, we at Obelisk offer a 50% discount on the MBL legal courses. So we really try and help you have all the resources at your fingertips, and are here as a team to help you. So I'm going to stop the slide share for the minute. Have a moment to think if you've got any questions. Is there anything I haven't covered, do you think, Jane, Evie, Daniela?
I think we have covered everything. But if there's anything you would like to discuss on a one-to-one, get in touch with me. You can reach me through my personal email or the community@obelisksupport.com email. If there's anything you'd like to discuss, if you've got an interview coming up, give me a call and I'm more than happy to just walk you through it and try and find out as well, try and get more intimate information from the client team so that I can share with you.
That's great. Thank you so much. So thank you everyone for attending, and thank you team too. And we have another.
I think we've got a question.
Oh, good.
It's from Anna. Could I mention during the interview the previous assignments with company names?
Okay. What do you think about that?
The previous client didn't have anything against that. I wouldn't say why not. So if the client is in agreement and you have the consent to mention their names, I would go ahead and do that.
Yeah, and at that stage we would have already shared the CV with the client anyway, so they'll probably have that in mind, have looked at it, and they know who you worked with in the past.
So that's okay. Good. Okay, thanks for that. And so we have the next Move the Needle webinar is on the 24th of March, and that's going to be about making your assignment a success. So if you've got any particular queries, do send them through, and we'll hopefully see you very soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.